Leora's heart raced as she stepped off the transport platform and onto the polished floors of the Grand Orion Academy. The hum of the station echoed around her, a mix of excitement and nerves building in her chest. She adjusted the strap of her small backpack and took a deep breath. This was it, the academy that promised to shape the galaxy's greatest minds, warriors, and leaders. And she, a human girl barely 18 years old, was here. Alone. Around her, aliens of all shapes and sizes moved with confidence. Some had sleek metallic bodies that shimmered under the bright lights. Others had skin of deep green or violet, with eyes that glowed faintly as they studied the newcomers. Leora had always known humans were considered weak by most advanced species. They were smaller, slower, and lacked any obvious extraordinary powers. Yet she held her head high, her eyes scanning the crowd with quiet determination. She wasn't going to hide. As she walked toward the main entrance of the academy, whispers followed her like a shadow. "Is that a human?" A tall, four-armed alien muttered to its companion, its voice a low growl. "They actually let one in?" Another whispered, its scales shimmering with what seemed to be amusement. Leora felt a pang of unease, but she refused to let it show. Humans had faced prejudice before, and this was no different. What mattered was how she responded. Inside the academy, the halls were vast and bright. Walls displayed floating holograms of legendary graduates, humans included, though few in number. Leora took a moment to absorb the images. Each one told a story. Humans had survived, adapted, and sometimes even led species far stronger than themselves. She reminded herself she was a human. She could do this. She would do this. Her first class was scheduled in the Interstellar Strategy Lab, and as she walked down the hall, she noticed a group of students leaning against the wall, whispering and staring at her. At the front was Vorak, a towering alien with gray skin and sharp, angular features. His eyes locked on her, narrow and calculating. There was something dangerous about him, something that made her instincts scream caution. As she passed, Vorak's voice cut through the hallway. "A human alone, how cute!" His tone was mocking, heavy with contempt. The group around him snickered. Leora's fingers tightened around her bag strap, but she didn't look away. "I'm not here for your opinion," she said calmly, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. The snickers grew louder. Vorak leaned forward, lowering his voice to a dangerous hiss. "You'll see soon enough how fragile humans really are." Her first day had already turned into a test she hadn't signed up for. She could either back down or face it head-on. Leora squared her shoulders and chose the latter. Classes were more intense than she had imagined. Each subject, physics of warp fields, alien diplomacy, combat theory, was taught by professors from species she could barely name. Some of the material was overwhelming, but Leora's mind worked differently. Humans had a way of seeing patterns others didn't, of thinking sideways when straightforward logic failed. She absorbed what she could, asking questions when appropriate, all while keeping an eye on Vorak and his friends. They didn't make things easy, whispering insults and making subtle attempts to trip her up during exercises. Lunch brought no relief. The cafeteria was a bustling arena of alien smells, sharp colors, and strange textures. Leora found an empty table and unpacked her food. She noticed Vorak approaching, followed by two of his cronies. "Mind if we join you?" Vorak asked, though it was clear they intended to intimidate rather than socialize. "I don't mind," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. Humans had learned long ago that calm could disarm aggression. They sat, each of them studying her, expecting her to flinch. Instead, Leora smiled slightly, taking a bite of her food. Vorak's confusion was almost satisfying. "You know," he said, leaning closer, "humans aren't supposed to survive here. It's a school for the gifted. And you're just a human." They thought size and strength mattered most. They had no idea that determination, clever thinking, and adaptability could make someone far more dangerous than they appeared. The afternoon brought their first practical exercise in the arena. The room was enormous, filled with obstacles and floating platforms. Students were to navigate the course while avoiding simulated hazards. Vorak's group immediately took the lead, their long limbs and advanced reflexes giving them an obvious advantage. Leora felt a flicker of doubt but pushed it aside. She remembered the stories of past humans who had faced impossible odds and survived. Humans weren't built for raw power, they were built for persistence. Vorak smirked as he moved ahead, clearly expecting Leora to struggle. But she stayed calm, studying the obstacles carefully. She noticed a pattern in the moving platforms, a timing that the faster, more powerful aliens ignored because they assumed brute speed would be enough. Leora adjusted her movements, hopping and ducking with precise timing. Step by step, she advanced, slowly closing the distance between herself and Vorak's group. By the end of the exercise, she wasn't first, but she wasn't last either. More importantly, she had completed the course without faltering, something some of the more arrogant aliens failed to do. Some students whispered among themselves, glancing at her with a mix of surprise and grudging respect. The day ended with her retreating to the dormitories, her body tired but her mind buzzing. Humans were small, often underestimated, but that didn't mean they were weak. Every challenge she faced reminded her of that truth. That evening, as Leora sat by the window of her dorm room gazing out at the stars, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The academy was vast, full of dangers she had yet to face. Vorak and his group had already made their intentions clear. They would not let her go unnoticed, and they would try to break her spirit. But humans had a history of surviving impossible odds, of turning the underestimated into the unstoppable. She didn't need alien strength. She had human ingenuity, resilience, and courage, and that could be more dangerous than anyone imagined. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. One of the other students, a small, blue-skinned alien with delicate wings, peeked in nervously. "You're different," the alien said quietly. "I've never seen a human handle the first day like that. Most of them don't last a week. Maybe you're the start of something new." The galaxy had underestimated humans for far too long. She intended to remind them why that was a mistake. And somewhere deep in her chest, a spark of excitement grew. This was just the beginning. The next morning, Leora woke before the sun of Orion Prime had fully risen. She could hear the faint hum of the Academy's energy grids and the distant chatter of early risers making their way to the classrooms. Her dorm was quiet, save for the soft rustle of her own thoughts. Today would be a test, not of a course, but of her ability to navigate a place designed for beings far stronger, faster, and older than herself. She dressed quickly, choosing practical clothing that would not restrict her movements. Humans were small and unassuming, and while some might call that a disadvantage, Leora had learned that it could also be an advantage. She could move where others could not, slip through spaces they could not reach, and see patterns too subtle for anyone accustomed to relying solely on power. Today, she would rely on all of that. The halls were already filling with students when she arrived at breakfast. The whispers had grown louder. Vorak and his group were seated at a long table near the center, smirking as she passed. Some of their friends snickered, throwing glances over their shoulders, eager to see if she would falter. Leora felt a familiar tension in her chest but pushed it aside. She knew she could not let fear guide her. She had to show confidence even before she proved herself in action. "Good morning," she said to no one in particular, choosing a quiet table near the windows. The sunlight glinted off the metallic wings of some students and the shimmering scales of others. She unwrapped her breakfast and ate slowly, observing without judgment. Vorak stood suddenly and approached her table, each step heavy with purpose. His crew followed, leaning in close, their eyes filled with expectation and arrogance. "You survived yesterday," Vorak said, voice low and mocking. "I admit I expected you to be a disaster. You barely lasted through the exercise." Vorak leaned slightly closer, his sharp features twisting into a grin. "Be careful, human. Today's exercise is not for the weak." Students were placed into small groups, each forced to navigate a complex course filled with moving platforms, energy barriers, and logical challenges. The rules were simple: reach the end as quickly as possible, complete the puzzles along the way, and avoid elimination. Vorak's group was paired together naturally, and unsurprisingly, they expected to dominate. Leora, on the other hand, was paired with two other humans who had been quiet during the first day. They looked at her with wide eyes, unsure how they would survive among aliens who could crush them without effort. "Follow my lead," Leora said softly. Her voice carried a quiet authority, the kind that drew attention without demanding it. The other two nodded hesitantly, placing their trust in the human girl who seemed so fragile yet so composed. The trial began. A loud chime echoed through the arena, signaling the start. Vorak's group surged forward, their long legs and enhanced reflexes giving them an immediate advantage. Leora, however, did not panic. She scanned the course, noting the timing of moving platforms, the position of energy barriers, and the sequence of puzzles that awaited. Unlike her alien classmates, she relied not on raw speed but on observation and planning. The first puzzle involved a series of floating panels that had to be arranged in the correct order to open a barrier. Vorak's group approached it with confidence, attempting to force the panels into place with brute strength. Sparks flew as their attempts failed, their impatience showing. Leora stepped forward, quietly analyzing the patterns. Within moments, she instructed her small team to move the panels in a way that the aliens had not considered, opening the barrier with minimal effort. A ripple of surprise passed through nearby students. Even some of the older aliens paused to watch, intrigued by the humans' unconventional method. Vorak's eyes narrowed. He had expected weakness, not precision. The next section of the course required climbing a series of vertical walls while dodging energy pulses that fired intermittently. Leora's small size allowed her to slip through narrow gaps, moving where others struggled to reach. Her team followed, inspired by her calm confidence. Vorak's group surged ahead, their strength helping them climb faster, but they were uncoordinated, and the energy pulses knocked them back several times. By the halfway point, Leora's team was no longer last. They were gaining ground. Her mind worked faster than her hands, predicting movements, timing jumps, and using strategy rather than speed alone. She noticed Vorak hesitating at a puzzle involving an alien language code. While he tried to brute force the solution, Leora stepped forward. She observed the patterns of symbols and their historical context from her classes, translating the code almost effortlessly. Her team moved through the section before Vorak could even react. A murmur ran through the spectators. Humans were small and often underestimated, but here was one defying every expectation. Vorak clenched his fists. The arrogance that had carried him through countless trials was crumbling. He forced his group to push harder, but their panic began to show. Leora, however, remained calm. She did not push herself recklessly. Every action was calculated, every movement efficient. The final section was a narrow bridge suspended over a holographic void, requiring balance, coordination, and trust. One misstep could send a competitor back to the start. Vorak's group moved confidently, expecting their raw power to carry them. But the bridge was unstable, reacting differently to each species' weight. Leora, light on her feet, adjusted instinctively, moving with the rhythm of the bridge. She guided her team carefully, whispering advice and encouraging them. They moved as a unit, each step precise, each action intentional. As they reached the end, the crowd erupted in applause. Leora's team had finished before Vorak's, not because they were stronger, but because they had used their minds, cooperation, and adaptability. Vorak's face twisted with disbelief and frustration. His crew muttered among themselves, their confidence shaken. Leora approached him, not with anger or gloating, but with quiet dignity. "Strength isn't everything," she said softly. "Sometimes it's about thinking differently." The rest of the day passed with more exercises, each one testing different aspects of skill and intelligence. Leora continued to surprise everyone. She solved complex logic challenges faster than anyone expected, maneuvered through obstacle courses with precision, and even improvised solutions to problems that the instructors had not anticipated. Slowly, the whispers shifted from doubt to admiration. Humans were not supposed to excel in the academy, yet here was one leading by example. By the evening, the students were exhausted, but Leora felt a quiet triumph. She had not only survived another day, she had begun to change the way her peers saw humans. Even the younger aliens approached her with cautious respect, curious about the human girl who had defied expectations. Back in her dorm, she reflected on the events. Vorak's hostility had not disappeared, but she had proven she could face it without fear. Humans had always been underestimated, yet it was precisely that underestimation that gave them an edge. They were unpredictable, adaptable, and clever, qualities that no amount of raw strength could match. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was the blue-winged alien from yesterday, her eyes wide with admiration. You really surprised everyone," the alien said, voice hushed. "Even Vorak, I didn't think a human could do this." "It's not about being the strongest," she said. "It's about using what you have wisely. Every species has strengths. Humans just happen to use theirs differently." Vorak would not give up easily, and there would be more challenges ahead. But she also knew something vital. Humans did not need to be the largest, the fastest, or the strongest to matter. Sometimes, being clever, brave, and persistent was enough to shift the balance entirely. That night, as she lay in bed, Leora allowed herself a small smile. The academy was full of dangers and rivals, but she had proven something fundamental. Humans were not to be ignored. She had survived the first real test, not by overpowering anyone, but by thinking, observing, and acting with confidence. And in the quiet of the dormitory, under the glowing lights of Orion Prime, Leora made a silent promise to herself. She would continue to rise, not for glory, but to show the galaxy that humans were capable of far more than anyone believed. The next day would bring new challenges, new obstacles, and undoubtedly new attempts by Vorak to assert his dominance. But Leora was ready. She had discovered something crucial. Her strength lay not in what the aliens could see, but in what they could not predict. And that made her dangerous in a way they could never understand. As the lights dimmed and the academy settled into night, Leora drifted into sleep, her mind alive with strategies and ideas. Tomorrow, she would continue to show that humans were not weak, and anyone who underestimated them would soon regret it. The morning sun of Orion Prime spilled across the academy grounds, casting long shadows from the towering spires and sleek transport docks. Leora stood at the edge of the main training arena, her heart steady despite the tension building in the air. Today was different. Today, the Academy had scheduled the Interspecies Challenge, a test of skill, strategy, and adaptability that would place students directly against each other. And Vorak, her constant shadow of hostility, would be there. As she entered the arena, she saw the other students assembling in teams. Vorak stood at the far end, his tall frame radiating confidence. His crew lingered around him, whispering strategies and glances meant to unsettle her. Some of the crowd whispered, curious to see if the human girl could handle herself. The atmosphere was thick with expectation, a mixture of skepticism and excitement. Leora didn't flinch. She had faced hostility before and had survived. Her strength lay not in raw power, but in observation, creativity, and unpredictability. She had learned to turn what others saw as weakness into an advantage. Today would be another opportunity to prove it. The challenge began with a sharp chime, and teams surged into the arena. The course was complex, shifting platforms, holographic barriers, puzzle gates, and energy streams that required precise timing to navigate. Vorak's group charged forward, their long limbs and superior reflexes giving them an immediate edge. Leora stayed calm, scanning the arena. She observed how the platforms moved, the timing of the energy streams, and the patterns of the holographic gates. While others relied on speed, she relied on calculation. She led her small team, 2 humans and a nervous blue-winged alien, through the first obstacle with careful steps. The humans followed closely, inspired by her confidence, while the alien marveled at her ability to plan and anticipate hazards. Vorak approached the first puzzle gate, a sequence of alien symbols that needed to be aligned correctly to open. He reached for the controls aggressively, attempting to force the sequence into place. Sparks flew. Leora, watching, noticed subtle differences in the symbols that Vorak ignored. She approached the gate, her fingers hovering over the controls, and adjusted the sequence with precision. The gate opened instantly, leaving Vorak and his crew blinking in surprise. How? Vorak muttered under his breath. Leora said nothing, only gesturing for her team to move forward. The arena demanded focus, and there was no time for unnecessary confrontation. The next challenge required crossing a series of suspended beams over a holographic chasm. The beams shifted weight and moved slightly with every step. Vorak's group leapt confidently, relying on their strength and size, but their momentum caused them to falter repeatedly. Leora's team moved more deliberately. Small, precise steps allowed them to maintain balance. Her human instincts for timing and coordination proved superior in this section. She guided her team silently, whispering instructions, and together they reached the far end without incident. The audience, students, professors, and visiting dignitaries watched in fascination. Humans were often underestimated, yet here was one leading a team through obstacles that should have been impossible for beings of such size and inexperience. Vorak's eyes narrowed as he reached the same point. He realized that brute force alone would not win this challenge. Leora's calm observation, strategic thinking, and ability to adapt gave her the advantage he had not anticipated. The next section was designed to test reaction and adaptability. Holographic targets appeared along a maze-like corridor, activating sensors that could trigger penalties for mistakes. Vorak's group rushed through aggressively, hitting sensors and losing valuable seconds. Leora slowed her pace slightly, analyzing the patterns. She noticed that the sensors activated in predictable sequences, but only if one assumed continuous movement. By pausing and stepping with careful timing, she and her team avoided all triggers. The maze opened onto a large central chamber, the final stage of the challenge. A platform floated above a holographic pit, requiring participants to leap across moving pads to reach the control console that ended the trial. Vorak's group was already attempting the jump, their confidence unshaken, but the pads were smaller than anticipated, designed to test precision and timing. One misstep could reset the attempt entirely. Leora studied the pads, memorizing the sequence. She coached her team silently. Wait for the second pad to shift, then step lightly. Pause here, don't rush. Her instructions were followed with exacting attention. When it was their turn, they moved flawlessly, each jump precise, each landing secure. Vorak attempted the sequence next. His long legs gave him reach, but his weight and momentum caused him to overshoot, forcing a reset. His crew struggled, their confidence waning as Leora's team progressed steadily. The crowd began to murmur in admiration. The human girl who was supposed to be fragile and weak had outperformed some of the Academy's most skilled students. Finally, Leora reached the console. With a deep breath, she activated it, signaling the completion of the challenge. Her team cheered quietly, while the audience erupted in applause. Some of the older students whispered to each other, amazed at the human's ingenuity and composure. Vorak's jaw clenched. He had underestimated her, and now it was painfully clear that humans could be far more dangerous than appearances suggested. As Leora descended from the platform, she caught sight of Vorak approaching, his stride purposeful. She stood her ground, meeting his gaze with calm defiance. "You were lucky," he said sharply, though the edge of uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. "Next time it won't be so easy." Preparation, observation, and strategy matter more than size or strength. Leora's performance was praised, highlighting her ingenuity, leadership, and ability to adapt. Some students approached her cautiously, offering congratulations. The blue-winged alien from her dorm whispered, "You really showed everyone today, even Vorak. It's about doing my best and proving to myself what humans can do." During a short break, Leora wandered toward the observation deck. She looked down at the arena, remembering the moment when she had first entered, unsure of herself, surrounded by beings far stronger and faster. Now she had navigated every obstacle with calm precision. She realized that humans often relied on resourcefulness and cooperation, qualities that no alien could easily mimic. A sudden commotion drew her attention. Vorak and his crew were arguing among themselves, clearly frustrated by their failures. The blue-winged alien from her dorm whispered again, "They're not used to losing, especially not to a human." Humans had survived in hostile worlds for centuries without relying on sheer power. That history was now quietly proving itself in the Academy. The final exercise of the day was a team strategy simulation, where students had to capture control points while defending against opponents. Leora's team was paired against Vorak's group. The simulation required quick thinking, adaptability, and cooperation. Vorak charged ahead with aggressive tactics, expecting to overpower anyone who stood in his path. Leora studied the map, noting weak points in his approach and guiding her team accordingly. Step by step, Leora's team advanced. They used unpredictable movements, setting up traps within the simulation and exploiting patterns Vorak had not anticipated. His team struggled to respond, becoming increasingly disorganized. Leora's leadership and insight made the difference. By the end of the simulation, her team had captured more points and achieved the objectives faster than Vorak's crew. The arena erupted in applause. Students from all species whispered among themselves, clearly impressed. Humans were supposed to be weak, fragile, and unpredictable, but Leora had shown that unpredictability could be strength when combined with intelligence and courage. Vorak, face flushed with frustration, finally approached her. His voice was sharp but quieter than before. "You've surprised me, human. This isn't over." Every step reinforced her belief that humans were underestimated, not weak. As night fell over Orion Prime, Leora stood by her window, looking at the stars. The Academy had tested her, and she had passed. She knew that Vorak would not relent, and that challenges ahead would be even greater. Yet she felt a quiet confidence. Humans had survived in the galaxy not because they were the strongest, but because they were clever, adaptable, and fearless when facing impossible odds. Tomorrow, the Academy would bring new trials, new tests, and undoubtedly new attempts by Vorak to assert his dominance. Leora was ready. She had discovered that the greatest strength humans possessed was not visible. It was their mind, their courage, and their will to overcome any obstacle. And as she drifted into sleep, Leora knew one thing with certainty. The galaxy had underestimated humans for far too long. It was only a matter of time before that mistake would be remembered and regretted. The following morning, the academy grounds were alive with the hum of anticipation. Today's schedule was unlike any other. The grand confrontation exercise, a trial designed to pit students against each other in teams, testing not only skill but leadership, intelligence, and strategy. Rumors had already spread through the corridors about Leora's previous victories. Whispers of the human girl who had outperformed seasoned aliens reached every corner of the academy. Some were skeptical, some curious, and some openly hostile. But none dared to underestimate her entirely, except Vorak, whose pride and temper simmered like a volcano ready to erupt. Leora arrived at the arena early, her steps measured, her mind focused. She could hear the chatter of other students forming their alliances, plotting strategies, and boasting of their strengths. Vorak and his crew arrived shortly after, radiating the confidence of those used to dominance. His sharp eyes immediately found her across the arena. "You're bold," he said as he passed, a hint of menace in his tone. "Bold humans usually get broken fast." The arena itself was massive, a labyrinth of platforms, shifting walls, and holographic obstacles. The exercise required both offense and defense. Teams had to capture a series of control points while preventing opponents from doing the same. The arena's dynamic nature meant no strategy could remain fixed. Adaptation was the key to success. When the signal sounded, teams surged forward. Vorak's crew moved with predictable aggression, relying on their strength and speed to dominate. Leora, however, moved deliberately, observing the terrain and the behavior of her opponents. She quickly identified a weakness in Vorak's approach. He moved too fast, assuming his superior reflexes and size would carry him through the course. He ignored the subtle environmental traps and failed to coordinate fully with his team. Leora whispered instructions to her own team, using small gestures and quiet cues. Her team followed without hesitation, responding to her every observation. They moved like a single organism, flowing through the obstacles with careful precision. Humans were not strong, but they were adaptable, creative, and fearless, qualities that Vorak had not accounted for. The first control point was a floating platform with a complex locking mechanism. Vorak charged forward, attempting to brute force the system. Sparks flew as his team struggled, and precious seconds were lost. Leora approached the platform calmly, her fingers moving with quiet confidence. She adjusted the mechanism, bypassing its defenses in a way that Vorak had not imagined. Her team followed, securing the point with perfect coordination. Vorak's frustration was evident. He gritted his teeth, realizing that force alone would not win this challenge. He shouted orders to his team, but their panic was beginning to show. Leora, on the other hand, kept her composure. Every step she took was calculated, every decision deliberate. Her team trusted her instinctively, and their movements reflected her calm authority. The next section of the arena was a maze of shifting walls, with energy fields that could block progress or redirect movement. Vorak's team barreled through, attempting to push obstacles aside. They moved quickly, but their speed caused them to trigger multiple energy barriers, forcing them to backtrack repeatedly. Leora studied the patterns of the barriers, noticing that the walls shifted in a predictable sequence. She guided her team through the maze with precision, avoiding unnecessary delays and maintaining momentum. Other students began to notice. Whispers of admiration spread through the crowd as they observed a human girl navigating the maze more efficiently than aliens who had been trained for years. Some of the older students exchanged glances, quietly acknowledging that this human was not just surviving, she was excelling. Vorak's temper flared as he finally emerged from the maze, only to find that Leora's team had already captured the next control point. His crew was disorganized, scrambling to regain position, while Leora's calm efficiency kept her team ahead. The final section of the course was a suspended bridge over a holographic void, with platforms that shifted and rotated unpredictably. Capturing the last control point required both courage and precision. Vorak's team approached first, leaping confidently onto the platforms, but their weight and momentum caused several missteps, forcing them to start again. Leora observed the patterns carefully, timing each movement. She led her team onto the bridge with quiet determination. Her small size allowed her to maneuver precisely, and her careful instructions ensured her teammates followed safely. Step by step, they advanced, each movement deliberate, each jump calculated. Vorak's crew faltered repeatedly, while Leora's team moved with effortless coordination. At the final platform, Leora faced Vorak directly. He glared at her, expecting resistance, aggression, something to justify his dominance. But she met his gaze evenly, unflinching. "You assume strength wins every battle," she said softly. "Sometimes it's the mind that carries the day." Leora's team had won, not through brute force, but through intelligence, strategy, and precise coordination. The crowd's reaction was a mix of astonishment and admiration. Students whispered in awe about the human girl who had outsmarted and outmaneuvered some of the Academy's most skilled participants. Even the professors nodded in approval, impressed by her ingenuity and leadership. Vorak's face flushed with frustration. He approached Leora, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. You've beaten me again," he said, each word sharp. "This isn't over." They had expected victory, yet the human girl had outsmarted them at every turn. Leora had not just survived, she had redefined what it meant to be human in the eyes of the Academy. After the exercise, students gathered to discuss the results. Leora's performance became the topic of conversation everywhere. Some approached her to offer congratulations, others to seek advice, and even a few who had been openly hostile before now regarded her with cautious respect. She answered questions patiently, sharing insight where she could, all the while remaining humble. That evening, Leora returned to her dorm, exhausted but exhilarated. She reflected on the day's events, understanding that victory was not just about winning exercises. It was about earning respect, proving capability, and demonstrating the value of human ingenuity. She had faced opponents who were stronger, faster, and more experienced, yet she had outmaneuvered them through patience, observation, and clever thinking. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. The blue-winged alien from her dorm entered cautiously. "Leora, that was amazing. Everyone's talking about you. Vorak's team, they don't know what to think." "You're different, better than we expected." As she prepared for bed, Leora glanced out the window at the stars above Orion Prime. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, no doubt, but she was ready. Vorak would continue to challenge her, and other students would watch closely, eager to see if the human girl could maintain her edge. But Leora had discovered something essential. Humans had strengths that could not be measured by size, speed, or alien expectations. Her mind, determination, and calm had proven more powerful than many assumed. Sleep came slowly that night, her mind replaying the day's events. She visualized strategies, anticipated possible challenges, and considered how to continue proving herself. Leora understood that the Academy was not just a place of learning. It was a stage where humans could redefine their place in the galaxy. She was not here to blend in or to survive quietly. She was here to demonstrate that humans, despite their small size and apparent fragility, were capable of extraordinary things. And as she drifted into a light, dream-filled sleep, Leora felt a quiet resolve settle in her heart. The galaxy had underestimated humans for too long, and she intended to make sure they never made that mistake again. Tomorrow would be another test, but Leora was ready. She had faced hostility, adversity, and doubt, and had triumphed. The Academy, Vorak, and the other students had witnessed the power of human ingenuity, courage, and adaptability firsthand. And the story was far from over. The galaxy might have expected humans to be weak, but Leora was proving day by day that underestimating a human was a dangerous mistake. The morning sun rose over the Academy, casting long shadows across the training grounds. Today was the final exercise of the term, the one that would define the students' reputations and mark their place among the galaxy's future leaders. Leora stood at the edge of the arena, her heart steady, her mind clear. The previous days had tested her courage, intelligence, and adaptability. Vorak had attempted to intimidate and outmatch her at every turn, yet she had remained calm, precise, and unbroken. Now, the Academy's instructors announced that the final trial would combine all the elements of the previous exercises: strategy, agility, intelligence, and leadership. It would be a team versus team competition, but the stakes were higher. Success here could earn recognition from the galaxy itself, while failure would solidify the belief that humans were fragile and weak. Leora glanced at her team, two humans, nervous but trusting, and the blue-winged alien who had quickly become her ally. She nodded to them quietly. "Remember what we've learned? Watch, plan, communicate, move as one. We're not just surviving, we're showing what humans can do." His sharp eyes locked onto Leora's, his expression a mixture of frustration and determination. He had underestimated her in the previous trials, and though he would never admit it aloud, he was cautious now. His crew waited for his commands, but even they could sense the tension that Leora's presence brought. The arena shifted at the sound of the signal. Floating platforms rose into place, holographic barriers activated, and energy streams began to pulse rhythmically. The challenge demanded speed, precision, and adaptability. Vorak surged forward immediately, expecting his usual strategy of strength and aggression to carry him through. Leora, however, paused for a moment, observing the environment. She noticed subtle shifts in the patterns, a rhythm that was easy to miss if one rushed. "Follow my lead," she whispered. Her team moved in sync, stepping carefully, jumping precisely, and navigating the obstacles with calculated movements. They avoided traps that Vorak's team triggered, which caused his group to waste precious seconds correcting their mistakes. The first control point was a puzzle gate, more complex than any they had encountered before. Vorak approached aggressively, attempting to force the sequence into place with brute strength. Sparks flew, and one of his crew sighed in frustration. Leora, in contrast, calmly analyzed the symbols. She noticed a pattern in their arrangement, something Vorak had overlooked in his haste. "Step back," she instructed her team. "Align the symbols this way." Precision was required to cross without triggering energy penalties. Vorak's team charged forward, relying on reach and speed, but their momentum caused missteps. Leora studied each movement, timing her team's jumps with care. Step by step, they advanced, landing with exact precision. Other students in the arena began to whisper, their curiosity turning into admiration. Humans were small, often dismissed, yet here was one outmaneuvering aliens who had been trained to think of themselves as superior. The murmurs grew louder. Even the professors leaned forward, impressed by Leora's combination of intelligence, calm, and leadership. The next section of the trial involved coordinated action. Teams had to defend control points while capturing others, requiring strategy, teamwork, and quick thinking. Vorak assumed that his raw power would allow him to dominate, but Leora anticipated his aggressive approach. She instructed her team to move in ways that exploited gaps in his strategy, setting small traps and distractions that slowed his progress. Vorak's face tightened. He realized that brute force alone could not secure victory. Each move Leora made demonstrated not just intelligence, but the human ability to adapt, predict, and act strategically. The final challenge was a suspended bridge over a glowing holographic pit, leading to the ultimate control console. It required both courage and precision, and teams had to work together to succeed. Vorak's group reached it first, leaping boldly, yet the shifting platforms and unpredictable energy fields challenged them, causing delays. Leora's team approached methodically. Every step was deliberate, every leap timed perfectly. As they reached the final platform, Leora faced Vorak directly. His eyes blazed with frustration. "You've beaten me again," he said sharply. "This time it ends differently. I will not lose to a human." With a coordinated effort, they completed the sequence, securing the final point. The arena erupted in applause. Her team had won the final exercise, not through power, but through intelligence, calm, and teamwork. The crowd's reaction was overwhelming. Students from every species murmured with admiration, professors nodded in approval, and even some of Vorak's crew approached cautiously, offering tentative congratulations. The human girl who had once been underestimated had now proven herself as a leader, strategist, and symbol of what humans could achieve. Vorak's face was a mix of frustration and reluctant respect. He approached Leora once more, his voice low. "You've changed how I see humans," he admitted, his pride keeping him from saying more. "This isn't over." Leora's performance was highlighted repeatedly. Her ingenuity, calm under pressure, leadership, and ability to think differently had set her apart. Some students who had mocked humans before now approached her, asking for advice and guidance. The academy had begun to see humans not as weak, but as adaptable, intelligent, and resilient. That evening, Leora returned to her dormitory. She was tired, but her mind buzzed with reflection. She thought of her first day, of the whispers and doubts, and of how far she had come. Every obstacle, every test had been an opportunity to demonstrate the value of human traits, creativity, courage, and persistence. The blue-winged alien from her dorm appeared once again, eyes wide with admiration. "Leora, you've done more than survive. You've changed how everyone sees humans. Even Vorak, he can't ignore it now. Maybe we've been wrong to underestimate you." The following weeks at the academy were marked by subtle shifts. Humans were no longer dismissed as weak or unimportant. Leora's victories had inspired others to look beyond appearances and appreciate the intelligence, ingenuity, and resilience that humans brought to the galaxy. Even Vorak, though still proud and competitive, had begun to show cautious respect, understanding that humans were a force to be considered seriously. By the end of the term, Leora had not only proven herself in every exercise, but had also become a symbol of human potential. Professors highlighted her achievements in lessons, and younger students looked to her as a role model. The Academy began incorporating exercises that valued strategy, creativity, and adaptability, qualities that humans naturally excelled in. One evening, as she stood by her dorm window overlooking Orion Prime's twin suns, Leora reflected on her journey. She had arrived as a single human girl among countless alien peers, underestimated and dismissed. Yet through observation, calmness, and ingenuity, she had turned every challenge into an opportunity. She had earned respect not through intimidation or force, but through the quiet strength of her mind and spirit. Her victories were not about proving humans were stronger than aliens. They were about showing that humans were unique, capable, and worthy of recognition in a galaxy that often underestimated them. Every small victory, every carefully planned action, had contributed to a larger understanding. Humans were not to be ignored. As the night settled over the Academy, Leora made a quiet promise to herself. She would continue to grow, to learn, and to show the galaxy the true value of humans. One day, humans would no longer be underestimated anywhere in the stars. And somewhere deep inside her, a spark of quiet pride and determination grew. The galaxy might have doubted humans for centuries, but Leora had already begun to change that perception, and the future was bright with possibility. The next morning, she would return to the Academy, ready for new challenges, new lessons, and new opportunities to show the power of human ingenuity, courage, and spirit. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She had arrived as an underestimated human girl, and she had left as a symbol of what humans could achieve when they refused to be defined by others' expectations. The galaxy had underestimated humans for too long. Leora had proven that mistake could be fatal for anyone who did.